physically.
Bowling now.
Do you like being a teacher?
Yes, I enjoy it, and I've had opportunity to get out and to do other things, but I've always thought it was a bit of a vocation, a bit of a calling, and I've taught primary, secondary and now tertiary with a primary component because I'm working with basically students who are going to teach primary age kids.
Would you prefer to work as a part-time as a teacher and part-time as a coach than be a full-time coach?
I'd like to work as a full-time coach also, but I think I'm better off. It gives a more balanced view. I'm also concerned about players who work full-time only at their football and don't have some other element in their life which is a buffer, if you like, to their football, because football's such a religion here in this part of the world. The only thing people want to talk to them about is their football. I think it's almost compulsory for players to have a job and to have other interests in their life, or they get sort of bogged down in just football talk and thinking, and I think the same thing for me. I don't think it'd be good for me as a person to be full-time just in football. I think the other elements give a bit of a balance to my, to my normal life.
I was talking to your psychologist yesterday about the fact that football in Melbourne, it's almost like a little private fantasy that the city has. Do you...
Yes, I think it is. I think it becomes an outlet for the emotions of the people who live here, almost as a religion maybe used to be, and people see it that way and use it that way. It's a vehicle for expression for a lot of people, and it doesn't matter whether you walk in academic it feels like I do here at this college. It's still a vehicle for constant discussion and social intercourse here, as it is in a factory or any walk of life in Victoria. It's a common core interest area as much as politics or religion or any other of the major features of our existence. I don't know that that's a good thing. I'm not saying that I agree that this society holds that kind of value, but it is a reality of life, and if you can have an association with a club and a real interest in football, it makes you a much more socially accepted person in this community than the person who doesn't.
Somebody said the other day that in Melbourne you talk about football first and then the weather afterwards, whereas most places, to strangers, you know.
Yeah, well, the only time, that's probably right. The only time weather's talked about is how it's going to affect the football.
Cut it a second, Lee. Sorry. What do you think people do identify with when they're supporting particular clubs?
Yeah, that's a more, I think, difficult question to answer. I'm not really sure whether they would like to see themselves in like the actors on the stage, whether they see other people portraying the things that they would like to be doing themselves but possibly are incapable of. But there's no doubt there's a real belonging, a real fellowship, a real relationship between the people and the club. I mean, club affiliation here is still very strong, despite the fact that players and coaches, and I've been one, who have moved from one club identity and affiliation to another. People don't change their affiliation. They are born and brought up a particular club identity, and they remain that way despite what may come and go. And I think it's that's what really gives football its bite, is that it is a biased view that everybody has. They see football and enjoy football through their club affiliation, and almost their daily happiness is dependent upon how that team's function. That's why so many miserable people in the community at the moment, because Collingwood's doing so badly, and that why when Collingwood lose there's so much absenteeism from work and visits to the doctor and all that sort of thing. And that's very understandable, because there are very strong emotional commitments which I saw, say, in the eyes of Carlton people. I've not had a long association with Carlton, but when you meet people of 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years supporting association with the club, and you've won a premiership and their tears are running off their cheeks, there is a real, whether we like it or not, there is a real emotional commitment to the entity called the Carlton Football Club, which really does control a lot of their happiness, if you like, their life's enjoyments.
You were involved with Hawthorn for years and years, and now you've changed and moved to Carlton. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that for me was an enormous emotional upheaval. I was a boy who was born and bred in Hawthorn who grew up and was forced by residential position to play with the Hawthorn Football Club, played over a period of nearly 20 years, or coached and played over nearly 20 years with that one club, and built up a real emotional commitment and association with the entity and the people who have been there. And Hawthorn's one of those places where the same people have been there almost forever. So for me, it was an enormous emotional wrench. It hurts me dreadfully to be called a traitor or you know, something similar relative to the Hawthorn Football Club, because I suppose if I'd had my way I would have still been there, but it wasn't my choice. But in having made the change, Albert, it's interesting that in working with a group of people, and this is the great thing about football or a lot of other institutions in this society, when you draw a large number of people, and in this case we have, say, 40-odd players and 40-odd support staff, so for us to achieve our goal, we've in fact got about 80 people employed, all heading in the one direction. Now that sort of unified effort in any institution brings about a tremendous, what we call in Australia, a tremendous mateship or fellowship or teaming or teamwork that exists between people who are independent in one sense but totally interdependent on each other to achieve the final outcomes. And when you get into that situation, because football's pretty hard to win here in any circumstance, unless you're all working together, you've got no chance of succeeding. I don't care how good you are, unless everybody is in fact working together, then the system can't unfold in the way you'd like it to. Well, that, to me, almost overnight built an affiliation or a kinship or a mateship with this group of people. They were giving a lot of themselves for me, as I hope I in turn was for them. And fortunately, because we were able to achieve the ultimate in the previous year, it built an immediate bond between those people. So in a sense, I have, in a very short time, been able to build up exactly the same sort of emotional commitment to a new entity through the people that I've worked with. And I don't see that as any real conflict anymore, although I did at the start.
The images that Hawthorn and Carlton, the teams, present seem to me to be very different images.
Oh yes, that's a good observation for somebody who may not have been here very long. I think they are at the opposite ends of the continuum in almost every sense. The way that they market themselves, the way that they play on the field, the way that they recruit their personnel, the way that they use the media. All of those factors, if you placed Hawthorn on the continuum and Carlton on the same continuum, all the other teams would be somewhere in between. And that probably for me has been a fascinating experience and a real education to see that there are positively two different ways of approaching the same sorts of problems. And I think I'm probably a better rounded football person having worked under both regimes rather than just having had the one which I believe to be the only acceptable way of playing and coaching and marketing your team.
The Hawthorn team is seen by people as playing a different style of football from the Carlton team. I don't know whether this is true or not, but it's one of the sort of things.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair comment. In the past it was more obvious than it is now. I think that Hawthorn have learnt in the same way as Carlton have learnt. Hawthorn was very much a defensive team who played on the philosophy it doesn't matter how little we score as long as the opposition scores less. And I think English soccer has the same sorts of traditions. There's been this conflict of philosophy. And Carlton were working at exactly the opposite when I got there. It doesn't matter how much the opposition score as long as we score more. Now, I don't believe either of those philosophies are in fact right, but it's somewhere in between. And the in between is that, you know, we're working extremely hard when the opposition get the ball to prevent them from using it the way they want it. But we're also working extremely hard when we've got the ball to make sure that we score as heavily as we can during the time that we have the operation. But players have got to be as they are in soccer, and we've learned an enormous amount from soccer and a lot of other major games of the world. You are offensive, everybody in nature, when you have possession of the ball, and we're working offensively all together. But the moment we lose possession of the ball and the opposition get control, then we've got to work hard, everyone, defensively to prevent them getting the score. Now, that's only a new concept, believe it or not, in Australian football. We've tended to be one way as a team or the other way, rather than the team themselves being flexible enough to change within the confines of the game at any particular moment.
when you moved from a team that played, or is supposed to play one kind of football, to a team that's supposed to play another, and you coached both, did you change your coaching methods?
Yes, I did. In emphases, I had to. And one of the problems, Albert, in going from one club to another is that you make too many changes too quickly, and you can destroy, because the strength of that team was still their offensive ability. In fact, it is today and will be on Saturday, that we will win because the greatest assets we have is our ability to use the ball and keep it amongst our players and score heavily. We've been working very, very hard on the other attributes, that is the defensive elements, particularly our tackling. We've employed a tackling coach, etc. But if you come in and you try and change, the same as we tried to change Hawthorn from one to another overnight, the coach would find himself almost ostracised by the team. That has happened to two previous coaches. Two of my predecessors at Carlton have lasted a very short period of time, because I believe they came in and tried to make, and I nearly fell for exactly the same problem, tried to make too many changes too quickly. You can only really modify gently any one approach, particularly when that approach has been quite successful. For me to come in as an outsider and say that's not the way to play and try and change them completely when they've already played that way and successfully, i.e. winning premierships, that'd be just cutting off your nose despite your face.
Last week you said after you'd lost the game last Saturday, you were at least quoted in the press as saying that you thought Richmond had done their homework very well and the tactics were very good. Would you say something about that?
Yes. One of the advantages that in this system of finals we have here with the 5, one of the real advantages in finishing first, and people will deny that first place is an advantage. They say you've played each Saturday for the whole year. Having a rest or a couple of rests in the final is not a wise procedure. We in fact had that last year with Carlton. Richmond will in fact have it this year and start favourite because of it, despite what the media might think. One of the real advantages is not only to get your players fit, that is over the little injuries and the problems that they all carry, and by not playing a game they're likely to come up less injured than they would if they were playing week by week. Not fit physiologically, because I don't believe that'll change much over the finals period anyway. But the other distinct advantage is you sit as a group and do your own scouting. And it's not a second-hand scouting that we normally do with someone going along to watch and then receiving a written report as to what happened and maybe watching it on videotape on a Thursday night. You in fact sit there with the other players and the coach and watch the opposition operate individually and collectively in front of you. And it is the best kind of pre-planning or scouting anyone can do, because we've all seen it and visualised that we've all got the same thoughts and pictures in our mind, and therefore we can plan very, very accurately to cover the strengths of the opposition and to exploit their weaknesses. And Richmond, give them their due, did that expertly. And I think that was probably part of our undoing, that we couldn't do the same in reverse.
What did they do to you?
Well, they learnt the lesson. We played them 3 weeks ago, and we were able to exploit a couple of their real weaknesses. They placed their weaknesses in such a position, it was a bit hard to explain, that we could not exploit them. They put their weaknesses on our strengths, would you believe, in certain positions, and told them to tail those strengths and do a particular job. And of course, all they did was reduce the effectiveness of 2 or 3 of our greatest prime movers, which with very ordinary players in the previous game. Now that's an outstanding use of personnel, rather than us exploiting them and get the positive benefit by playing over the top of their 3 weaknesses. They gave them specific jobs to do on our good players, which effectively took our 3 players out of the game, and the fact that their players weren't great contributors in the sense of getting the ball and doing something with it, they were able to nullify the effectiveness of our prime movers. They were also able to place a couple of their big strong players in positions where the opponents who they knew were going to pick would be less happy playing. And I think Perevic's an obvious example. Perevic plays much better at half-back than full-back. Full-back is a lot closer to the goals under extreme pressure. You make a mistake, you're likely to score. At half-back you can play with a little more flair and ease, knowing that someone else behind you might be able to pick up your mistake. Well, they forced the issue, because they knew we played Perevic on cloak, because we thrashed him last time, so So they took Perovic back closer, took Perovic and Cloak back closer to the goal, which in fact was playing on a weakness of that particular player.
So the pushing of Cloak up was in fact aimed at making you pull Perovic back?
Oh yes, I think one was to assist Cloak to perform. He'd been injured, he's got broken bones in his hand and a knee where he can't run, so if he's in a position that demands more of him as an athlete, that's going to make his job harder. So at half forward for Cloak is more demanding physically for him, whereas at full forward the ball generates, you don't have to go chase it, the ball comes to you there because it's in front of the goal. And he's big and strong, as long as he doesn't have to run, the ball will in fact funnel him. He's got to stand his ground and use his height and strength on the spot rather than have to get himself to the ball. So that was a distinct advantage for Cloak also, not only a disadvantage for Perovic.
They also seemed to me very much to be, whenever you got a free kick or a mark, the players slowed the game up by, they were willing to give away 15-metre penalties, but they got their players back in the, is that?
Excellent tactic, and that's not something else they planned, because whereas their game is based on the ability to use the ball, and they've got extremely good small running players, they've also got the advantage that we don't have, is they have lots of big, tall, strong players. So under stress, under enormous tackling pressure, they can still afford to kick the ball up in the air, long and high, knowing that they're not going to be outmarked where the ball arrives, that they've got a better than even chance of marking it. So they have two methods of ball possession, keeping possession, which is little ones to running players. They've got plenty of those, as we have too, and we've got better ones, so we've got that one avenue. But we don't have the avenue of just being able to, under pressure, say, well, we can't kick it in, they're all covered, boom, just kick the ball long. Now, when they kick it long, they have 7 or 8 players of 6'3" and over, and we've got 2. So their 5 are a distinct advantage in being able to, under pressure, play the other game, which is maybe not the best game to play, but certainly under pressure it is. Now, what they stopped was us running, and it will probably highlight that we're going to have to do something in our game, I mean, with regard to the rules, to make the 15-metre penalty much more severe, because it's worth, if I take a mark, and you're a defender who's coming past to get the ball from me because we want to run it up, and you're being held onto back there, they can't give you a free kick there because in fact would be disadvantaging the side because the ball will have to go back further. But by giving me a 15-metre penalty, that counts nothing. It just gives everybody a chance to man them up and us not being able to run. Now, it appears to me the next coaches' conference, I certainly will be going to say, well, let's make the 15-metre penalty the equivalent of 1 kick, a 50-metre penalty. So that if they're going to hold them up, a 50-metre penalty will become very, very costly. You know, a lot of ground will be gained by 50 metres. At 15 metres, it's worth giving away all the time. And you've seen that as an observer, that it can prevent a team from playing legitimately the way it should be allowed to play. So because Carlton has all its eggs in one basket, we don't have tools, I'm going to have to do something about the rules for the sake of my club and in the future.
How are we doing for time?
Okay, sorry.
I'd like to change the subject a bit. The Polkinghorne-Wayne Johnson episode. There's been a lot of talk about Polkinghorne's evidence at the tribunal. Can you say anything about, not necessarily about him, but about the whole convention of evidence, you know?
Yes, it's been a, and I'm not sure why the ethos historically occurred, but I think it's probably the old Australianism. You look after the underdog, and you even though you snotted you on the nose, you pick him up again because you might be in exactly the same position sometime in the future, and you'll be depending on him to tell lies. Of course, I know David extremely well, and he's the sort of person who could only tell the truth anyway, and no one should be condemned for telling the truth. I think he was also a very brave person because he did break a code of behaviour which hasn't, as you know, you saw the uproar that occurred in the media and from players and coaches and everybody accordingly, because he did something which just wasn't expected in that situation. And he may regret in one way that he ever did, but knowing David he probably won't, because he's a very strong sort of character. It's probably hard for people to understand. I don't know what exists in other codes of sport, whether players do stick with each other or they do tell the truth or whatever. It might be the first and last time. I don't believe because one player has that the rest will turn round. Even some of his teammates have said publicly that they won't be saying what Parkin and Hawthorn did, but they're mainly those who think they might be in trouble also in the future and will want some support from the person who's been, been struck. It's a very difficult, social problem really in football.
Were you upset about it?
No, well, did to say I should be upset because it was my player involved and my players involved. I think that we've had an extremely good run from the tribunal. I think even the players who are involved have had a reasonable run from the tribunal. I'm very realistic about those sort of things, fatalistic too. Once it's happened, it happened. It certainly has been very costly for Carlton. There's no doubt that it was a crucial factor in our loss. Johnson has been, for the last 6 weeks, our most consistent player. He's been averaging what we call 34 contributions, we call them contributions per game, and the nearest to him in the last 6 weeks has been David Glascott, who's been an extremely good player, who's been averaging 29. So he's been significantly better than any other player in the team. And as a half forward who kicks goals, and forwards are harder to come by than anybody else, it was a crushing blow for Carlton to lose him. And then on the same day to lose their other most effective forward, Bazusto, who not all the year but certainly in the last month has been an exceptional player too, made it almost impossible for us to win before we got there, because you just can't replace one, let alone two, off the most crucial line. A half-forward line is the most crucial line in Australian football. To lose two off the one line made it very, very difficult. So it was sad. I was sad for the players, and I think they probably don't get a chance to live it down because they're reminded constantly when we're continuing to play and we're continuing to miss them and they're continually not there. And I suppose they are sort of destroyed internally as well by the fact that they believe that they've let themselves and the club and their teammates down.
Could we...
The terrace is closest to the ground.
And the terrace is in the outer. The grandstand's on one side and the terrace is opposite. They're right in the middle of the ground.
Talking about changing conventions. Earlier this season, before I came back, there were reports that in the press that you'd criticised an old friend of yours, Leigh Matthews, publicly. Was that a change of convention, or were you misquoted?
I wasn't misquoted, but I was quoted off the record, which is one of the problems of having the post-match, and it probably goes on in most other games, goes on in good on. I think it goes on in soccer too, where the coach or the manager gives an interview to the media, and I was just a bit incensed by one of the acts and said it as a passing throwaway phrase that I thought he should have been reported. And of course the Sunday papers here, looking for the sensational material which they write, adopted that, and they adopted knowing that by writing it it's probably going to sever a relationship that I've had with a friend and a colleague and a teammate for a long period of time. And that was a bit sad that it put a very strong friendship in jeopardy. But the strength of Leigh Matthews' character allowed us to survive that and get back on. He wrote me a letter first expressing his his displeasure, and which I answered and explained why it had happened. I wasn't denying that it had, but I explained why. And which followed by a phone call from Leigh, which I was very pleased that he made the move, because I don't know that I would have had the strength of character to do that. And of course that's put him under constant pressure since. Fortunately for me, Ron Barassi opened his mouth too, so that's taken a little bit of the heat off me. And Leigh now is playing under that sort of, and I think Leigh's quite capable of withstanding that sort of public pressure. He's a marvellous player and a marvellous person, and I don't think it will affect him anyway, but positively. And unfortunately it affected him positively the next time because he was the best man on the ground. And if people keep resurrecting it, it'll help him again on Saturday, which I shouldn't be assisting him to do. But those are the sorts of things when you changed allegiance. That would never happen while I was still a part of Hawthorn, but as soon as you move away, your loyalties then are with Carlton players, and one of my players had been dealt with. And I, as his coach, couldn't stand back and just accept that without saying or doing something.
The press are at the moment playing up the personal enmity between, between the Carlton players and the Hawthorn players, picking on the Johnson Polkinghorne incident and so on. Is there anything in it at all?
No, I think if anything it's the other way. There's a very good relationship, probably because I've been in both places, and a number of Carlton players like Kevin Heath, who used to be a member of the Hawthorn team, is also there. We've got two players back at Hawthorn now who were Carlton players a little while ago, and the cross-pollinisation at player level means that there's a very good relationship. It won't be the Holocaust, this game, that everybody predicts it will be. Neither side is capable of playing that way. I think there's a mutual respect, and mutual respect based on the two different methods that are playing. We respect Hawthorn's ability to get the job done in their way, and I believe they respect our ability to do the same. But there is a lot of ill feeling at an administrative level and probably at a supporter level, particularly as Hawthorn have often seen themselves as second-class citizens, as being co-tenants of Princes Park. I don't believe that Hawthorn have always thought that that it was benefiting Hawthorn as much as it probably should have, and it was obviously benefiting Carlton a lot more to have Hawthorn there. So there's been a fair amount of animosity at administrative level between the two clubs for a long period of time. But they don't play the game, and the players will determine how ferocious and whether it's going to be World War III or not. I don't believe that that will become a reality on Saturday.
One of the points that was raised in the tutorial this morning referred to a coach, with Tommy Hayfie, keeping his methods unchanged year after year, and the players becoming familiar with the methods and growing bored and so on. I think you're constantly changing your methods. Would you talk a little bit about your innovations in coaching?
Well, I'm not, and I'm not doing as much as I should. I'm aware that that is necessary, but it's not always that easy to change. I mean, basically the same ingredients are required, the same outcomes have got to be produced, and I know that there are many ways of achieving the same outcome, and that's what we've got to come up with, is a variety of methods or approaches to achieve the same end result. And that's why even scouting opposition at training, not only in playing side but at training, the sorts of things we're doing, has become imperative for us to get new ideas, new variations in training, changing your support staff, bringing in, as we've done this year, the director of coaching in rugby union, who's an expert tackler, and using him in a specialist way to teach techniques of tackling. That's been sort of an innovation this year in an area where we need to do a lot of work, but we have little expertise. I think to keep coming up with new ideas is one of the great challenges in coaching, and that's why coaches last such a short time. Why I think 3 or 4 years, unless you get an enormous changeover in playing personnel, seems to me about the limit that one coach can stay in one place, because it's pretty hard to keep serving up sausages in too many other forms. I mean, you can boil them and you can fry them and you can do all sorts of things with sausages, but to finish their sausages, and that's one of the difficulties.
You have umpires at your training?
Yes, we've used them a great deal over the last couple of years for both social or psychological reasons, as well as for legitimate setting up of our functional practices the right way, so that the players are going to be adjudicated according to the way they'll be adjudicated on a Saturday, instead of me making my decisions, which are probably going to be 50% wrong. We can have umpires there interpreting the things that players are doing the way that it's going to happen on a Saturday. And I think we've benefited enormously from the relationship that's formed between the umpire and the players. They start to get a better understanding of us and we of them. But more importantly, tackles have to be correct. If we are a little slack in our tackling, but it's not knocked off at training, then you continue to produce those habits on Saturday and get knocked off on Saturday. But now we're being knocked off at training for incorrect tackles, and therefore we're more likely to learn the correct technique.
When I left your warm-up on Saturday, which I found very interesting as always, I walked past the Richmond dressing room, and through the walls I could hear a great deal of blood and thunder enthusiasm going on. Does that not happen? Have you abandoned that kind of thing?
I know. It's interesting because the warm-up was a little different on Saturday, because we've had, it's been more a problem of controlling emotion when we played Richmond, and that was one of our problems in the previous game. We only played them 3 weeks ago and beat them quite comfortably, because there is a great deal of animosity between the Richmond club and the Carlton club, because historically Carlton have been dealt some very severe physical blows by individual Richmond players on Carlton players, which have cost them dearly in a physical sense. So there's never much need to arouse players against Richmond. More, it's a problem of controlling their emotions so they can get hold of themselves and perform according to the ability they have. Now, we might have underestimated the situation last Saturday in our warm-up, and our warm-up was a much quieter, and we thought it was a sign of a very quietly determined side, and that's the way we were reading it, and I was very happy to see it that way. So we did not go out of our way to do a lot of the more physical elements that we would have on most days in our warm-up. But I guess that procedure will change this week. I was very conscious that we were intruding on your warm-up, and thank you for letting us in because it was interesting. I was very anxious not to intrude on it at all. And in the middle of it, one of the owners of your club walked in with a huge cigar and moved straight into the middle of everything that was going on. Are you? It's a difficult question to ask. Am I in a position to be able to control that?
No, I was trying to say you're very much a professional, and your approach is very much professional. Your club approach is very much professional. But outside it, there are images connected with your number one member and all that, you know. Where do the two things come together?
Yes, that's probably difficult, because if the club generates a particular image through its directors, whatever you like to call them, through the chief administrators or directors of the club, then you can often carry a label which is in fact not true. We carry a label of being arrogant at Carlton. It's often written in the press, and I think it probably gripes me more than any other one label that's given to Carlton. I'd rather be called a bunch of squibs than to be called arrogant, because arrogance is built on an unrealistic view of oneself. I think that if anything, Carlton players are very realistic, even more realistic than they should be, of their own ability to do a particular job. And I suppose if anything irritates me, it's people perpetuating that image in their behaviour or whatever, who aren't specifically involved with the playing side. And that's a difficult thing for me to overcome. Our outward and visible sign really is our players on the field, but that's counteracted by the flamboyant way that we perform to the press and to the media as individuals who are directing a club, and that's counterproductive, in my opinion, to the sorts of things that we want generated. And that there's a little bit of a conflict there, I'd imagine.
We were in a pub on the Friday before the match down in South Melbourne, and there was an immense amount of anti-Carlton stuff going on there, and it was mainly directed against the fact that Fraser was your number one member.
You'll imagine, well, you chose the pub in the right place in South Melbourne. It'll be a good strong working class area that we couldn't identify with Malcolm Fraser anyway. Yeah, I suppose that, Carlton have been known as the Blue Bloods, and I, as an outsider before coming to Carlton, had the same sorts of empathy or lack of empathy with the Carlton Football Club for that reason. But it is a great club with a lot of very important community people associated with it. Manning Clark, the great Australian historian, spoke at our pre-season dinner, and I don't think I've ever heard a better address from an academic giving or placing the meaning of this thing called the Carlton Football Club in his life, the meaning it had to him as a boy growing up and as an adult now, as an old man in semi-retirement. And when you realise the significance of that entity to people like that, then it can claim some real significance in this society. It's very difficult. There is a lot of very bad feeling against or for clubs who succeed over a long time. The same with Collingwood. You either love Collingwood or you hate them, and it's probably better to be that way, because if you're looked upon in any other guise rather than love or hate, you hate them because you're not one of them, or you love them because you are, then it probably means you've been a successful unit. When you're held in just contempt and nobody really talks about you or wipes you off and nobody feels one way or the other, it probably means that you've not succeeded for a long time. And middle of the road sides have tended to be, fall into that category. Well, I suppose if it means we've got to be hated, I'd rather have the successful side and be hated. Not that I like it much, but it has that added dimension of welding people together. It's them versus us, and probably why Carlton succeeded, because we had that sense or feeling. On Saturday it'll be interesting, because only people who want Carlton to win on Saturday will be those loyal Carlton people. Not another soul in Australian football will want Carlton to win. I can assure of that, because probably they think that we couldn't do the job against Richmond the week after anyway, and they much rather Hawthorn there, because I think Hawthorn can. And anyway, Carlton had it last year. Why should they be back there again next year? Should be a fascinating contest on those grounds alone.
I just find it very entertaining when I hear you teaching. You're expressing the kind of philosophies that I would go for totally, about spreading the base and that kind of thing. Whereas Carlton's image, stemming from its number one member downwards,
is looking after elitist. Yes, that's quite true. And I think that VFL football is the elite. It's that echelon of football in Australia, and we are one unit of that. So that's not unrealistic to look at it that way. I just look at sports participation a bit differently. I just think there's one thing in this community that we just haven't done. We've got a lot of, as you've already seen, we've got a lot of spectatorism, and we haven't got nearly enough participation. I mean at all levels in all sports. And until we can do something about the base, and I mean this is at a younger age and at an amateur or junior level, more so than a senior and professional level, when we can really build a strong base in whatever sport, the country as a whole, I believe, the people as a whole, the health, the physical and emotional health of the people as a whole, will be far better than it currently is. And I think it's time that governments here, both at Commonwealth level and state level, started to realise the significance of sport as a lobby, as a political lobby. If we could only get our act together, we could run any government out of business in this country, but we can't get our act together. I mean, already, and that's no criticism, already the arts receive huge sums of money compared with sport, yet they are only involving a very small percentage of the population compared with sport. And I think there's got to be some levelling out of the commitment by governments in those two areas. I mean, there'll be a lot of argument against that by a lot of people. I'm also interested in the arts and participate, but I think at the moment it's a biased view in one area, not the other.
One final question. You showed me the other week, you let me catch a glimpse of the dossiers that you give to players. It's a big, thick dossiers, and you ask them to read them and study them and so on. Do you think you have to be an intellectual to play for Carlton?
Somebody said when I first arrived at Carlton, if you haven't got a degree in witch's hattery, you won't be able to follow the training, because we're putting out markers on the ground, etc., to show them where to go. I think you can often get more out of an intelligent person than you can out of one who can't see the variations or the possibilities. But there are a lot of extremely good footballers, and at Carlton too, who play basically through their feet. That there's not great intellectual or cognitive processes operating, certainly at an awareness level. No, I think probably the other way. The academics, you put the academics on the back line and put them in defence because they have no excuses, because you put them on the forward line, they can always come up with an excuse. Academics tend to think an enormous amount about their football and theorise about it and how it's going to happen, when football is basically a stimulus response game, and you've got to make immediate decisions on that. The fact that you take time to consider what you're going to do, the opportunity is lost to do it anyway. So I probably would argue against academics playing in football, but football, one of the great things about our game, Albert, is that we have and cater for the complete spectrum of social and academic status, if you like. I can name 8 or 9 graduates in our 40 players. I can name plenty of blokes who are using their hands and using manual skills extremely well, who are also gracing the same football ground and doing the same sorts of skills. So it's been a game for the people, more so than some other sports in this country, where there is a great cross-section. You've got doctors rubbing shoulders with garbos in Australian football, and happy to do so and accepting each for what they are, because they're all the same once they cross the white line. And I think that's been one of the great things about my participation in football.
Thank you very much.